The pregnant mare stood trembling at auction, her hollow eyes meeting Lily's as the kill buyer's paddle rose for the final damning bid. A fierce, unstoppable resolve ignited in the 11-year-old's chest as she lunged forward, her split-second decision about to challenge her father and transform both their destinies forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The early morning sunlight streamed through the cracks of the old barn, casting golden beams across the dusty air. The livestock auction was already buzzing with activity as farmers, traders, and curious onlookers milled about, examining the animals that would soon go under the hammer. Among them was a chestnut mare, her once gleaming coat now dull and patchy, standing quietly in the corner of a makeshift pen. Unlike the other horses who nickered and shifted nervously, she remained still, her eyes half closed as if conserving what little energy she had left. Her name was Amber, though no one at the auction called her that anymore. To them, she was just Lot 43, another piece of livestock to be sold off to the highest bidder. What most failed to notice was the slight swell of her belly. Amber was with foal, carrying new life within her weakened body. Maxwell Jenkins, a hard-faced man with calloused hands and eyes that had long since forgotten compassion, stood nearby, occasionally glancing at the mare with barely concealed disappointment. She had been a decent investment once, winning a few local races before her performance began to decline. When he discovered her pregnancy, the result of an unplanned encounter with his prize stallion, his frustration only grew. A pregnant mare was worth less to him than one that could work or race immediately. "Shouldn't have kept her this long," he muttered to his ranch hand. "Feed costs more than she's worth now. Just hope we can get something for her." The ranch hand nodded without emotion. "Market's down anyway, might be lucky to break even." As the morning progressed, potential buyers walked through the lines of pens, marking their catalogs and whispering among themselves about which animals might be worth a bid. Many paused at the flashier horses, the young, spirited geldings and the well-muscled quarter horses that looked ready for work. Few spared more than a passing glance at Amber, her quiet demeanor and visible ribs telling a story most didn't want to hear. "Pregnant," one man noted, squinting at her belly before shaking his head and moving on. "Not worth the trouble." "Poor condition," another commented to his companion. "Probably overworked and underfed. Foal might not even make it." Their words floated past Amber, who had learned long ago that hoping for kindness only led to disappointment. She had known better days once, years ago, when she belonged to an older woman who brushed her daily and spoke to her in gentle tones. But that life had ended abruptly when the woman passed away, and Amber had been sold to Maxwell, beginning a cycle of hard work and minimal care that had slowly worn away at her spirit. Now, as she stood waiting for her turn on the auction block, Amber had surrendered to whatever fate awaited her. Her only concern was for the foal she carried, a small flicker of life that occasionally reminded her of its presence with a gentle kick against her side. Outside the auction barn, 11-year-old Lily Morgan sat on a wooden bench, swinging her legs back and forth as she waited for her father. Her pink backpack rested beside her, filled with her sketchbook and colored pencils, her constant companions whenever she had to accompany her dad to these events. Thomas Morgan was a small-time horse trainer who occasionally bought promising animals at auction to train and resell. Today, he was inside examining the offerings, while Lily, who found the noise and bustle overwhelming, had opted to wait outside. "You can come find me when they're about to start," she had told her father, who had nodded distractedly, already scanning his catalog for potential prospects. Lily sighed, glancing at her watch. The auction wouldn't begin for another 20 minutes, which meant more waiting. She zipped open her backpack and pulled out her sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with horses drawn in various poses. Horses had been her passion for as long as she could remember, their grace and power translating beautifully through her pencil strokes, even at her young age. Growing restless, Lily decided to take a walk around the grounds. Her father had always told her to stay where he could find her, but surely a quick exploration wouldn't hurt. Slinging her backpack over her shoulder, she wandered toward the back of the auction barn where some of the animals were still being unloaded and sorted into pens. It was there, away from the main crowd, that Lily first saw Amber. The mare stood alone in a small pen, separated from the other horses. Unlike the energetic animals being led off trailers, this horse stood perfectly still, her head lowered slightly as if carrying an invisible weight. Lily approached slowly, her heart constricting at the sight of the mare's protruding ribs and dull coat. As she drew closer, Amber raised her head slightly, her ears flicking forward in a small gesture of acknowledgement that made Lily smile. "Hi there," Lily whispered, extending her hand palm up against the fence. The mare regarded her cautiously, then took a tentative step forward, stretching her neck to sniff the girl's fingers. Her nostrils flared gently, taking in Lily's scent, before she pressed her soft muzzle against the girl's hand. The simple gesture of trust brought tears to Lily's eyes. "You're beautiful," she said softly, noticing for the first time the mare's swollen belly. "And you're going to be a mommy." For several minutes, Lily stood talking quietly to the mare, stroking her velvety nose and scratching the sweet spot behind her ears that made her eyes droop with pleasure. It was in these gentle moments of connection that Lily noticed something else, a barely perceptible spark in the mare's eyes, a whisper of the spirit that had once defined her. "Lily, there you are." Her father's voice broke through her reverie. Thomas Morgan approached with a frown of concern. "I've been looking everywhere for you. The auction's about to start." "Dad, look at this horse," Lily said, not moving from her spot. "She's pregnant, but she's so thin. Why doesn't anyone take better care of her?" Thomas glanced at the mare, his experienced eye taking in her condition with a single sweep. "Some people don't deserve to own horses," he said simply, the tightness in his jaw revealing his displeasure. "Come on, Lily, we need to get inside." "We can't just leave her," Lily protested, her hand still resting on Amber's nose. "What's going to happen to her?" Her father sighed, recognizing the determined look in his daughter's eyes. "She'll be sold, like all the others. That's how these auctions work." "To who? Who would want to buy her when she looks like this?" "Dad, nobody's even looking at her." Lily's voice cracked slightly. "They're all ignoring her." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lily recognized as a sign of internal conflict. "Lily, we came here to look for a training prospect. We don't have the space or resources for a rescue case right now, especially not a pregnant mare." But Lily wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was already racing, calculating the money she had saved from birthdays and chores, stored in a tin box under her bed. It wasn't much, nowhere near enough to buy a horse, but it was something, a starting point. "Dad, please," she said, turning to face him fully. "I'll do anything. I'll clean stalls every day. I'll wake up early to feed. I'll use my own savings. Please, we can't leave her here." Thomas looked from his daughter's pleading face to the quiet dignity of the mare who had somehow captured her heart in the span of a few minutes. There was something in the animal's gentle eyes that stirred a memory. His own first horse, a rescued Appaloosa that had taught him more about patience and trust than any human ever could. The auctioneer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing that the sale would begin in 5 minutes. Time was running out. "Dad?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper now, her hand still resting protectively on Amber's nose. Thomas Morgan took a deep breath, already knowing he would probably regret what he was about to say. "Go find us seats inside. I'll talk to the auction manager about her." Lily's face lit up with hope. Really? You mean it? I'm not promising anything, he cautioned quickly. But we'll see what we can do. As Lily hurried toward the auction barn, her pink backpack bouncing with each step, Thomas turned back to look at the mare. For a brief moment it seemed as if the horse was watching Lily go, her eyes tracking the small figure in the distance. Perhaps it was just his imagination, but Thomas could have sworn he saw a flicker of something like hope in the mare's gaze. Inside the auction barn, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation and the peculiar blend of smells that defined livestock sales, hay, animals, and humanity pressed too closely together. Wooden bleachers lined the sale ring, already filling with potential buyers clutching numbered paddles and dog-eared catalogs. Lily squeezed into a spot on the second row, her small frame tensing each time the auctioneer's voice boomed through the speakers. She scanned the crowd anxiously for her father, finally spotting him near the entrance, deep in conversation with a man in a worn cowboy hat who appeared to be checking something on a clipboard. Her father's expression was serious, his hands moving emphatically as he spoke. Lily clutched her backpack to her chest, hoping beyond hope that whatever he was saying might help the mare she had just met. The auction began with a flurry of activity as the first animals were led into the ring. Sheep and cattle came first, the auctioneer's rapid-fire delivery turning numbers and bids into a hypnotic rhythm that washed over Lily without meaning. Her mind remained fixed on the chestnut mare, wondering how much longer she would have to wait to learn her fate. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, the horse portion of the auction began. Young, healthy animals brought respectable prices, with buyers nodding confidently as they secured their purchases. Lily watched each sale with increasing anxiety, her fingernails digging into her palms as she waited. Her father slipped into the seat beside her, his face unreadable. "Dad, what happened? Did you talk to them about the mare?" Lily whispered urgently. Thomas put a hand on her shoulder. "I spoke to the manager. Her name's Amber. She's registered, but her papers haven't been kept up. She's 7 years old and about 5 months pregnant." "So can we help her?" Lily pressed. "I've made some inquiries," Thomas said carefully. "Let's just watch for now." 3 more horses came and went. A dappled gray gelding caused a small bidding war, eventually selling for nearly twice what Thomas had guessed. A paint pony perfect for children went to a kindly-looking woman who smiled as she raised her paddle. A muscular bay draft cross sold to a farmer who needed a sturdy work animal. And then, with little fanfare, Amber was led into the ring. The difference between her and the previous animals was stark. Where they had pranced and tossed their heads, Amber walked slowly, deliberately, as if conserving every ounce of energy. The handler barely needed to guide her. She simply followed, stopping obediently in the center of the ring and standing quietly while the auctioneer began his spiel. Next up, Lot 43, 7-year-old chestnut thoroughbred mare, former racer with some wins to her name. Currently in foal, sire is a registered quarter horse. Sold as is, where is. Who'll start the bidding at 500? The barn fell uncomfortably quiet. Buyers shifted in their seats. A few shook their heads. Most simply looked away. Lily felt a painful lump forming in her throat as she watched Amber standing patiently, seemingly unaware of the judgment being passed on her. "Folks, this is a registered thoroughbred with racing bloodlines. The foal alone could be worth something. Let's start lower then. 300? Still no response. Lily could see Maxwell Jenkins, the mare's owner, standing at the edge of the ring, his face darkening with each passing moment of silence. She glanced at her father, who was watching the proceedings with an intensity that made her nervous. "All right then, let's get this moving. 200? We've got to start somewhere, folks." The auctioneer's voice had lost some of its enthusiastic bounce. He looked out over the crowd with growing frustration until finally, a paddle raised at the back. 200 from bidder number 29. Do I hear 250? Lily turned to see who had bid. A heavy-set man in the back row barely acknowledged the auctioneer's recognition, his face impassive. She had seen his type before at these auctions, buyers who picked up the cheapest animals for resale to slaughterhouses across the border. Her stomach clenched. "Dad," she whispered, tugging urgently at his sleeve. "Dad, that's a kill buyer." Thomas nodded grimly, his jaw set. "I know who he is." 200 going once, the auctioneer called. Lily felt tears welling in her eyes. This couldn't be happening, not to Amber, not to her unborn foal. She fumbled with her backpack, thinking wildly of the 87.43 she had saved at home, as if that could make any difference now. 250, Thomas called clearly, raising his paddle. Lily's head snapped up, hope blooming in her chest. Her father's face remained calm, but she could see the muscle working in his jaw, a sure sign he was more tense than he appeared. The kill buyer raised his paddle again without hesitation. 300. 350, Thomas countered. The auctioneer's rhythm picked up again, his voice regaining some of its earlier energy as the bidding continued. 350 from bidder 42. Do I hear 400? The kill buyer frowned slightly, reassessing the mare from his position. After a moment's consideration, he raised his paddle again. 400. 450. Thomas responded immediately. Lily held her breath. How high would her father go? They weren't wealthy people. Their small training operation made enough to keep them comfortable, but there wasn't much room for extras, especially not horses that needed expensive care. The kill buyer's eyes narrowed as he looked over at Thomas, seeming to size him up. There was a moment of tense silence before he shrugged and lowered his paddle, turning to mutter something to the man beside him. 450 going once, going twice, sold to bidder 42 for $450. A wave of relief crashed over Lily so powerfully that she nearly collapsed against her father's side. Thomas put his arm around her shoulders and gave her a gentle squeeze. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Don't thank me yet, he said quietly. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. As the next horse was led into the ring, Thomas guided Lily outside to complete the paperwork and payment for their new purchase. The auction manager handed over Amber's registration papers, outdated as they were, along with a brief medical history that consisted of little more than vaccination records from 2 years prior. You know what you're getting into? The manager asked Thomas, his voice neutral but his eyes questioning. That mare's going to need some serious care. The foal too, if it makes it. We know, Thomas replied simply. The manager nodded, seemingly satisfied. She's in the holding pen out back. You can load her whenever you're ready. As they walked toward the pen, Lily could barely contain her excitement, practically skipping despite her father's warnings about the challenging road ahead. All she could think about was that Amber would be coming home with them, that she and her foal would be safe. They found the mare standing quietly where they had left her earlier, though now she wore a paper tag with "Sold" stamped across it in bold red letters. When Amber saw Lily approaching, her ears pricked forward in what seemed like recognition. She remembers me, Lily breathed, reaching out to stroke the mare's nose. Thomas watched his daughter with the horse, his expression softening. Maybe she does. Or maybe she just knows the difference between someone who sees her worth and someone who doesn't. As they prepared to lead Amber to their trailer, Maxwell Jenkins appeared, leaning against the fence with a sour expression. Thought I'd be rid of that hay burner for good, he commented, spitting into the dust. Don't know why you'd waste good money on her. She's been nothing but trouble. Lily stiffened, her hand protectively stroking Amber's neck. Thomas regarded the man coolly. Then I'm sure you won't mind parting with her. Your funeral, Maxwell shrugged. Don't come crying when that foal's born dead or deformed. Breeding was an accident anyway. Before Lily could say something she might regret, Thomas placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Let's go, Lily. Amber's waiting for her new home." As they led the mare away, Lily whispered promises into her new friend's ear. Promises of green pastures, proper meals, and a safe place to bring her foal into the world. Whether Amber understood the words or merely the kindness behind them, she followed willingly, her steps just a little lighter than before. The Morgan family farm was modest by any standard, 20 acres of gently rolling land on the outskirts of Riverdale, with a weathered barn, a round pen for training, 4 fenced paddocks, and a small 2-bedroom house that Thomas had been slowly renovating since his wife's passing 3 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was home. And as they turned into the gravel driveway with Amber quietly standing in the trailer behind them, Lily couldn't imagine a more perfect place in the world. "Where should we put her?" Lily asked, practically bouncing in her seat as her father slowed the truck. "The back paddock has the most grass, but the small one by the barn would make it easier to keep an eye on her." Thomas considered for a moment. "She'll go in the quarantine stall first. We don't know what she might be carrying that could affect the others." Lily's excitement dimmed slightly at the reminder that their new charge wasn't simply a wonderful addition to their small herd, but a horse in need of serious rehabilitation. The quarantine stall was in a separate section of the barn, away from their other 3 horses, an aging schoolmaster gelding named Hank, Thomas's spirited cutting horse Buck, and Lily's own gentle pony Dandelion. As Thomas backed the trailer up to the barn, their elderly neighbor Frank Miller appeared from around the corner, his perpetually curious expression suggesting he'd been waiting for their return. Frank had been farming the adjacent property for over 50 years and seemed to consider it his personal duty to keep tabs on the comings and goings at the Morgan place. "Saw you heading out to the auction this morning," he called, ambling over to peer into the trailer window. "What you bring back this time, Tom?" Thomas sighed, preparing himself for the inevitable commentary. "A mare, Frank, thoroughbred." Frank's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Amber's condition. "Looks like you got yourself a project. And she's in foal, too, by the looks of it." "She needed help," Lily interjected, already climbing out of the truck. "Nobody wanted her except a kill buyer." Frank's weathered face softened at Lily's passionate declaration. He'd watched the girl grow up, had seen how hard Thomas worked to keep things afloat after Rachel's death, and had a soft spot for both of them despite his gruff exterior. "Well then," he said, hitching up his faded overalls, "suppose you could use an extra hand getting her settled." Thomas shot him a grateful look as they lowered the trailer ramp. Amber backed out cautiously, her hooves clopping softly on the wooden ramp. In the full sunlight of the early afternoon, her poor condition was even more apparent, ribs clearly visible beneath her dull coat, hip bones protruding sharply, and her once proud neck thin and lacking muscle. But despite her weakened state, she held her head with a quiet dignity that made Lily's heart swell with admiration. They led her slowly to the quarantine stall, which Thomas had prepared with fresh bedding and clean water before they'd left for the auction. Amber walked in without hesitation, immediately lowering her head to sniff the fresh hay in the corner. "At least she has an appetite," Frank commented. "That's always a good sign." Thomas nodded, his trained eye assessing the mare. "I'll call Dr. Martinez to come out tomorrow. For now, we'll let her settle in, give her small portions of hay, and see how she handles it." "Her teeth might need floating before she can eat properly," Frank offered. "Seen it before with neglected horses." "We'll get her sorted," Thomas assured him, closing the stall door gently. "Thanks for the help, Frank." As Frank headed back to his own property, Lily lingered by the stall, watching Amber pick delicately at the hay. There was something almost regal about the mare, even in her diminished state. like a princess fallen on hard times but still remembering her royal heritage. "She's going to be beautiful when she's healthy again," Lily said confidently. "Just wait and see." Thomas rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Lily, I need you to understand something. We're going to do everything we can for Amber, but horses in her condition, sometimes they don't make it, especially with the stress of a pregnancy. I don't want you to get your hopes too high." "She'll make it," Lily insisted, her young face set with determination. "She just needs someone to believe in her." Looking at his daughter's unwavering faith, Thomas couldn't help but be reminded of Rachel. His late wife had possessed that same stubborn optimism, the ability to see potential where others saw only problems. It was one of the many things he had loved about her, and one of the many ways Lily took after her mother. "Well," he said finally, "we'll start by doing what we can. Small, frequent meals, clean water, and a safe place to rest. Sometimes that's all it takes to turn things around." Throughout the afternoon, Lily made frequent trips to check on Amber, bringing her fresh water and sitting quietly on a stool outside the stall, talking to the mare in soft tones about everything and nothing. She described the other horses, the changing seasons on their small farm, and her dreams of someday becoming a veterinarian. Amber seemed to listen, her ears flicking toward Lily's voice, her eyes following the girl's movements. As evening approached, Thomas found Lily still at her post, sketchbook open on her lap, carefully drawing Amber's profile. "Dinner's ready," he said, "and you still have homework to finish before school tomorrow." Lily sighed but nodded, closing her sketchbook. "I'll come back to say goodnight to her after dinner." "One more check before bed, and that's it," Thomas conceded. "She needs rest more than anything else right now." After a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread, Lily tackled her math homework with unusual speed, motivated by the promise of one more visit to the barn. When she finally finished, the sun had set, and Thomas accompanied her with a flashlight for the final check of the evening. To their surprise, Amber was lying down in the stall, her legs tucked beneath her and her breathing deep and even. She raised her head when they approached, but made no move to stand. "Is she okay?" Lily whispered anxiously. "Should she be lying down like that?" Thomas shone the flashlight gently, careful not to startle the mare. "She's fine, Lily. This is actually a good sign. Horses don't usually lie down unless they feel safe. She's resting comfortably." The realization that Amber already felt secure enough in her new home to truly rest brought tears to Lily's eyes. "See, Dad? She knows she's safe now." Thomas couldn't argue with the evidence before him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, for tonight at least, Amber had found peace. The following morning, Dr. Elena Martinez's truck pulled into the driveway just as Thomas was finishing the morning feeding. The veterinarian was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had been caring for the Morgan horses since before Lily was born. She greeted Thomas with a firm handshake and Lily with a warm smile. "So I hear you've added to your herd," she said, pulling on her work gloves. "Let's have a look at this mare of yours." Amber watched cautiously as they entered the stall, but remained calm as Dr. Martinez began her examination. The vet checked her teeth, listened to her heart and lungs, felt along her spine and legs, and carefully palpated her swollen belly. "Well, she's definitely in rough shape," Dr. Martinez said finally, straightening up. "Malnourished, some dental issues that need addressing, and a fair amount of muscle loss. But her heart sounds strong, and I can feel the foal moving, which is encouraging." "So they'll both be okay?" Lily asked hopefully. Dr. Martinez looked at her with kind but honest eyes. "I can't make any promises, Lily. The next few months will be critical. We need to improve her condition without putting too much stress on the pregnancy. It's a delicate balance." She turned to Thomas. "I'll draw some blood for testing, check for parasites, and put together a feeding plan. We'll need to build her up gradually, Too much too soon could be as dangerous as too little. As the vet continued outlining the treatment plan, Lily stood beside Amber, her hand resting lightly on the mare's neck. She could feel the steady pulse beneath her fingers, the gentle rhythm of life continuing despite all odds, and in that moment, she made a silent promise to be there for Amber every step of the way, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The recovery plan Dr. Martinez outlined was meticulous and demanding. Amber would need small, frequent meals throughout the day, a mixture of high-quality forage and specialized feed designed for broodmares. She required daily grooming to stimulate blood flow and monitor for any skin issues, gentle exercise once she was strong enough, and a carefully calibrated schedule of supplements and medications to address her various deficiencies. It's going to be a lot of work, Dr. Martinez had warned before leaving. Like having a newborn, with round-the-clock care. Thomas had nodded grimly, mentally calculating the additional costs and time commitments they'd just taken on. But Lily had simply absorbed the instructions with solemn determination, already making notes in a small spiral notebook she'd pulled from her backpack. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now, as Thomas walked toward the barn in the pre-dawn darkness to administer Amber's morning medications, he marveled at how quickly their routine had adjusted to accommodate the mare's needs. Lily had created a detailed chart that hung on the barn wall, tracking Amber's meals, medications, weight, and vital signs with a precision that would have impressed a professional stable manager. More surprising still was how readily Lily had embraced the less glamorous aspects of horse care. She never complained about waking up early before school to help with morning feedings, or spending her afternoons cleaning Amber's stall instead of watching TV or playing with friends. The commitment she'd shown went beyond childish enthusiasm. There was something deeper driving her, a connection to the mare that Thomas couldn't quite explain, but had come to respect. Inside the barn, he was surprised to find the lights already on. He checked his watch, 5:45 a.m., and frowned. Stepping quietly toward Amber's stall, he found Lily already there, her school backpack propped against the wall as she gently curry-combed the mare's coat. "Lily, school's not for 3 hours. You should be sleeping." She looked up, dark circles visible under her eyes in the barn's harsh lighting. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the chart. Her weight gain slowed down yesterday. It's only 1/2 pound instead of the 1.5 pounds Dr. Martinez wanted to see." Thomas sighed, leaning against the stall door. "Honey, recovery isn't always a straight line. There'll be good days and not so good days." Lily continued brushing, her strokes methodical and gentle. "I know. I just want to make sure we're not missing anything." As Thomas watched his daughter with the mare, he noticed how Amber leaned slightly into the brush, her eyes half closed with pleasure. Though still thin, her coat had begun to regain some shine, and her eyes were clearer and more alert than they had been upon arrival. These were all positive signs, but Thomas understood Lily's concern. Amber's progress, while steady, was slower than they'd hoped. "Let me get her medication ready," he said, moving toward the feed room. "Then you're going back to the house for at least another hour of sleep. You have that math test today, remember?" Lily nodded reluctantly, giving Amber one final stroke before following her father. As they prepared the mare's morning feed, mixing the prescribed supplements with careful precision, Thomas noticed Lily stifling a yawn. "You can't help Amber if you run yourself into the ground," he said gently. "Taking care of yourself is part of taking care of her." "I know," Lily admitted. "It's just, sometimes I have these dreams that we wake up and she's not okay, and I get scared." Thomas put down the feed scoop and pulled his daughter into a hug. "That's not going to happen. We're doing everything right, and Amber's a fighter. You can see it in her eyes." "Like Mom was?" Lily asked quietly, her face pressed against his flannel shirt. The question caught Thomas off guard, a familiar ache blooming in his chest. Rachel had indeed been a fighter, facing her illness with the same quiet determination that Lily now showed with Amber. But in the end, all the determination in the world hadn't been enough. "Yes," he said finally, "just like Mom." After ensuring Lily went back to the house for more rest, Thomas returned to Amber's stall with her breakfast. The mare nickered softly at the sight of the feed bucket, a sound they'd only recently begun to hear from her. It was another small victory, another sign that the withdrawn, defeated horse from the auction was slowly finding her way back to life. Later that morning, after Lily had left for school, Thomas was cleaning tack in the barn when he heard the sound of tires on gravel. Looking up, he was surprised to see Dr. Martinez's truck pulling into the driveway. Their next scheduled visit wasn't for 3 days. "Morning, Thomas," she called, climbing out with her medical bag. "Thought I'd stop by on my way back from the Henderson place. Had to put down an old gelding with colic. Could use some good news to balance out my day." Thomas set aside the bridle he'd been cleaning. "We're making progress, but it's slow going. Lily's worried about the weight gain." "That's why I'm here," Elena replied, opening Amber's stall door. "I've been thinking about her case, and I want to try adjusting her feed formula. Sometimes with pregnant mares in poor condition, we need to get creative." As the vet examined Amber, Thomas leaned against the doorframe, watching. "Lily's really attached to her. I'm starting to worry about what happens if things don't work out." Elena glanced up, her hands still checking Amber's flanks. "Kids are resilient, Thomas. More than we give them credit for." "She's already lost so much," he said quietly. "Her mother, her sense of security. I just want to protect her from more hurt." "The best protection isn't avoiding pain," Elena said, straightening up. "It's learning how to handle it when it comes. Besides," she added with a small smile, "this mare is doing better than I expected. She's a survivor." After Dr. Martinez left with a modified feeding plan and some additional supplements, Thomas found himself standing before Amber's stall, watching the mare methodically working through her hay net. Despite his concerns, he couldn't deny the bond forming between horse and child. Each day, Amber seemed more responsive to Lily's voice, turning to watch whenever she entered the barn, nickering softly and greeting. That afternoon, when Lily returned from school, her steps were quicker than usual, her expression bright with excitement. "How was the math test?" Thomas asked, looking up from the fence post he was repairing. "I think I did okay," she replied distractedly. "Dad, I had an idea in science class today. We were learning about heartbeats and how mothers and babies can sync up, and I was thinking, what if I read to Amber in the foal? Mrs. Wilson says reading aloud can be calming, and maybe it would help both of them." Thomas smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Dr. Martinez stopped by today and adjusted her feeding plan, so maybe your reading can be part of her new routine." Lily's face lit up. "She was here? What did she say? Is Amber doing better?" "She thinks Amber's doing well, all things considered, but we need to be patient." That evening, after completing her homework and chores, Lily settled on a stool outside Amber's stall with a copy of Black Beauty. As she began to read aloud, her voice clear and expressive, Amber gradually moved closer to the stall door, her ears pricked forward attentively. "See that?" Thomas whispered to Frank, who had stopped by to drop off some extra hay. "I've never seen her so engaged." Frank nodded, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. "Animals know more than we give them credit for. That mare understands she's being cared for now." For the next hour, Lily read steadily, occasionally pausing to show Amber the illustrations or to explain a particularly dramatic moment in the story. The mare remained near the stall door, occasionally lowering her head as if to get a better look at the book's pages. When it was finally time for bed, Lily marked her place and closed the book reluctantly. "We'll continue tomorrow, Amber, I promise." As they walked back to the house under a sky full of stars, Thomas placed an arm around Lily's shoulders. "You're doing a wonderful job with her, you know. I'm proud of you." Lily leaned against him, tired but content. "Do you think the foal can hear the story too?" "I'm sure of it," Thomas assured her, "and I bet it's the highlight of their day." That night, as Thomas checked on the horses one final time before bed, he found Amber standing alert in her stall, watching the barn door as if waiting for Lily to return. It struck him then that perhaps his daughter wasn't the only one forming an attachment. Somehow, against all odds, the neglected mare had found not just shelter and food at their farm, but something she might have missed even more. Someone who saw her value beyond what she could provide. Someone who cared simply because she existed. "She'll be back tomorrow," Thomas told the mare softly. "That's one promise you can count on." A month passed, bringing with it the first hints of spring. The bare trees around the Morgan property sprouted tender buds, and patches of green began to emerge from the winter-brown pastures. Inside the barn, another transformation was taking place. Amber, though still thin, had gained enough weight that her ribs no longer stood out in stark relief against her sides. Her coat, once dull and lifeless, now caught the sunlight with hints of copper and gold, revealing the beautiful horse she had once been. Most remarkable was the change in her demeanor. The quiet resignation that had defined her at the auction had given way to a gentle alertness. She greeted Lily with soft nickers, followed her movements with interested eyes, and had even begun to playfully nudge the girl's pockets for treats. The withdrawn mare was slowly becoming a willing participant in her own recovery. "She's like a different horse, Doctor," Martinez remarked during her weekly visit, watching as Amber lowered her head to accept a halter from Lily without hesitation. "And the foal's development is right on track. I'd estimate we're looking at another 3 months before delivery." Thomas nodded, relief evident in his expression. "So we're out of the danger zone?" "I wouldn't go that far," the vet cautioned. "Pregnancy and birth always carry risks, especially with a mare that's been through what Amber has. But I'm more optimistic than I was a month ago." After the vet left, Thomas found Lily in the paddock where Amber was now allowed short periods of supervised turnout. The girl was sitting cross-legged in the grass, sketching while the mare grazed nearby. As he approached, Thomas was struck by the peaceful tableau they created, the chestnut mare with her growing belly, and the small figure with her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, completely absorbed in her drawing. "What are you working on?" he asked, settling beside his daughter. Lily tilted her sketchbook to show him a detailed drawing of Amber, rendered with surprising skill for an 11-year-old. In the sketch, the mare stood proud and healthy, her pregnancy barely visible, her neck arched gracefully. "This is how she'll look when she's completely better," Lily explained. "I'm going to hang it in her stall so she can see what she's working toward." Thomas smiled at his daughter's unwavering optimism. "That's a beautiful thought, Lily, and a beautiful drawing." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as Amber methodically grazed her way across the small paddock. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of a car coming up their driveway, an unfamiliar black SUV with tinted windows. "Are we expecting anyone?" Lily asked, closing her sketchbook. Thomas shook his head, standing to greet the visitor. As the vehicle parked, a tall woman in an expensive-looking riding outfit stepped out, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She surveyed the property with a critical eye before spotting Thomas and walking toward him with purposeful strides. "Mr. Morgan," she called. "Thomas Morgan?" "That's me," Thomas replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman extended a manicured hand. "Victoria Harrington, I believe you purchased a mare at the Riverdale auction last month. A chestnut thoroughbred?" Thomas shook her hand briefly, his expression guarded. "That's right, Amber. She's right here, in fact." He gestured toward the paddock, where the mare had raised her head at the sound of the newcomer's voice. Victoria's gaze shifted to Amber, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed the horse. Yes, that's her. I've been looking for this mare for quite some time. She was stolen from my farm almost a year ago. Thomas and Lily exchanged startled glances. Stolen? Thomas repeated. We bought her legally at auction. She came with registration papers. Incomplete papers, Victoria corrected. If you check, you'll find they don't include transfer of ownership to whoever sold her to you. That's because she was taken from my property before I could report her missing to the registry. Lily had moved closer to Amber, her small hand resting protectively on the mare's shoulder. Her name was already Amber when we got her, she said, her voice smaller than usual. Victoria's expression softened slightly as she addressed Lily. Yes, that was the name on her papers. Her registered name is Amber Dawn. She was one of my best brood mares before she disappeared. Thomas crossed his arms, his face unreadable. So you're saying Maxwell Jenkins stole her from you? I don't know who took her, Victoria admitted. But I've been tracking her through various sales ever since she vanished. I nearly caught up with her at an auction in Fairfield 3 months ago, but she'd already been sold. Then I heard about a pregnant thoroughbred mare at the Riverdale sale and thought it might be her. Thomas's mind was racing. If what this woman said was true, it would explain a lot, including why Jenkins had been so quick to discard a valuable horse. Stolen property would be a liability, especially if someone was actively searching for it. Do you have proof? He asked finally. Documents, photos, anything that shows she belonged to you? Victoria nodded, retrieving a folder from her SUV. Inside were photographs of Amber in her prime, gleaming coat, strong muscles, standing proudly in a lush green field. There was also a copy of her complete registration papers listing Victoria Harrington as owner, along with a police report detailing the theft. As Thomas reviewed the documents, Lily's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Amber, burying her face in the mare's neck. The thought of losing her now, after everything they'd been through, was unbearable. Victoria watched the girl's reaction with a complicated expression. I can see she's been well cared for recently, she said more gently. She looks much better than I expected, given what I heard about her condition at the auction. We've been working with her day and night, Thomas replied, his voice tight. My daughter especially has devoted herself to Amber's recovery. Victoria nodded slowly, her gaze moving between the mare, the girl, and the modest farm around them. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were Lily's muffled sniffles and the soft breathing of the pregnant mare. Finally, Victoria sighed. Mr. Morgan, I'm going to be frank with you. Amber is valuable to me, both financially and sentimentally. Her bloodlines are exceptional, and the foals she's produced have done well in competition. Thomas nodded grimly, bracing himself for what was coming. He didn't have the resources to fight a legal battle over the mare, especially against someone with Victoria Harrington's obvious wealth. However, she continued, surprising him, I can see that removing her now would be complicated. The pregnancy, her recovery, your daughter's attachment. She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Lily looked up, hope flaring in her tear-streaked face. What kind of arrangement? I propose that Amber stays here until she foals, Victoria said. She seems comfortable, and moving a pregnant mare can be risky. After the foal is born and weaned, we can reassess the situation. And the foal? Thomas asked. Technically, as Amber's owner, the foal would be mine as well, Victoria replied. But given the circumstances and the care you've provided, I'd be willing to discuss shared ownership. Thomas glanced at Lily, whose expression had shifted from despair to cautious hope. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would give them more time with Amber, and at least a chance of keeping her foal. We'd need something in writing, he said. And I'd want Dr. Martinez, our vet, to continue overseeing Amber's care. Victoria nodded. I'll have my lawyer draw up an agreement, and I'd like to visit occasionally to check on her progress, if that's acceptable. As they continued discussing terms, Lily returned her attention to Amber, who had resumed grazing peacefully, unaware of the negotiations determining her future. The mare's quiet presence grounded Lily, reminding her of what was truly important, not who owned Amber on paper, but who was there for her each day, caring for her needs, helping her heal. It's going to be okay, Lily whispered to the mare, hoping with all her heart that it was true. The legal agreement arrived by courier 3 days later, a dense document filled with legal terminology that made Thomas's head ache. He spread the papers across the kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed, reading each clause carefully and marking sections that concerned him. The core of the arrangement was as Victoria had outlined. Amber would remain at the Morgan farm until the foal was weaned, with all care decisions approved by both parties, and Victoria covering the expenses going forward. The fate of the foal was left deliberately vague, with a promise to negotiate in good faith once it was born. Thomas rubbed his tired eyes, uncertainty gnawing at him. On one hand, the arrangement relieved the financial burden that Amber's care had placed on their limited budget. On the other, it meant acknowledging that the mare they'd come to love wasn't truly theirs and never would be. Worst of all was knowing how devastated Lily would be when the time eventually came for Amber to leave. "What would you do, Rachel?" he whispered to the empty kitchen, wishing, as he often did, that his wife were still here to offer her steady wisdom. The next morning, Thomas signed the agreement and sent it back to Victoria's lawyer. That afternoon, Victoria herself appeared at the farm, her sleek SUV looking out of place next to Thomas's weathered pickup truck. "I brought some things for Amber," she said by way of greeting, opening her trunk to reveal bags of premium feed, supplements, and a monogrammed blanket. "And I'd like to see her, if that's all right." Thomas nodded stiffly, leading her to the barn where Lily was already tending to the mare. The girl looked up as they entered, her expression guarded. Though Thomas had explained the situation as gently as possible, Lily was still struggling to accept that Amber had another owner. "Hello, Lily," Victoria said, her tone softer than it had been during her first visit. "You've done wonders with her. She looks better than I dared hope." Lily managed a small smile, her hand resting protectively on Amber's neck. "She's gained almost 100 pounds. Dr. Martinez says her blood work is almost normal now." Victoria approached slowly, extending her hand for Amber to sniff. The mare's ears flickered forward with interest, and after a moment's hesitation, she stretched her neck to investigate the familiar scent. "She remembers me," Victoria murmured, a mixture of relief and something else, perhaps guilt, crossing her features. "I was afraid she wouldn't." Lily watched closely as Victoria stroked Amber's forehead with practiced hands. "You really did own her before?" she asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Victoria nodded, her eyes still on the mare. "For 3 years. She came to me as a 4-year-old after her racing career ended. We had a connection." She glanced at Lily, "Not unlike what you seem to have with her now." The acknowledgement surprised Lily. "What was she like? Before, I mean." Victoria's expression softened with memory. Spirited, intelligent, sometimes too clever for her own good. She could unlatch gates and free the other horses, and she loved to run. Even after racing, she would gallop just for the joy of it. Lily tried to reconcile this image with the withdrawn, defeated mare they'd found at the auction. "Do you think she'll be like that again?" "I hope so," Victoria said simply. "With proper care and—" she hesitated, "and love, horses can recover from remarkable hardships." As the weeks passed, Victoria's visits became a regular occurrence. Every Saturday morning, her SUV would appear in the driveway, and she would spend hours at the farm, helping with Amber's care, consulting with Dr. Martinez, and gradually sharing more of the mare's history with Lily. To Thomas's surprise, Victoria proved to be knowledgeable and genuinely concerned about Amber's welfare, often bringing specialized equipment or supplements that the Morgans couldn't afford. One rainy Saturday in April, Victoria arrived wearing jeans and rubber boots instead of her usual riding attire, practical clothes for the muddy conditions. As she and Lily worked together cleaning Amber's stall, the girl finally asked the question that had been bothering her for weeks. "Why didn't you look for her sooner when she was first stolen?" Victoria paused, leaning on her pitchfork. "I did. I filed police reports, contacted auctions and sales, even hired a private investigator. But horses can change hands quickly, especially if someone's trying to hide their tracks." She sighed. "The truth is, the horse world is bigger than you might think, and once an animal disappears, it can be nearly impossible to find them again." Lily considered this, continuing to spread fresh bedding. "Is that why you're letting her stay with us? Because you couldn't find her before?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Partly," she admitted finally. "I feel responsible for what happened to her. If I'd had better security, if I'd searched more thoroughly." She shook her head. "But it's also because I can see how much you care for her and how well she's responding to being here. Right now, that's what matters most." As Amber's pregnancy progressed, her belly grew rounder, and her demeanor continued to improve. By mid-May, she was healthy enough for short rides, and Lily had her first opportunity to sit on the mare's back. Thomas led them around the paddock at a walk, with Victoria watching approvingly from the fence. "Keep your hands soft," Victoria called. She's always had a sensitive mouth. Lily nodded, adjusting her grip on the reins. The feeling of sitting on Amber was unlike riding any other horse. There was a connection, a sense of trust that made even this simple walk feel magical. Beneath her, Amber moved with surprising grace for a pregnant mare, her stride smooth and balanced. "She was trained in dressage, you know," Victoria commented later as they untacked the mare, "before her racing career. She still remembers her training. You can see it in how she carries herself." Lily's eyes widened. "Dressage, like in the Olympics?" Victoria smiled. "Not quite that level, but she had potential. She's got the mind for it. Sensitive, willing to learn." Could we learn together?" Lily asked hesitantly. "If she stays long enough?" A shadow crossed Victoria's face. "We'll see," she said, not unkindly. "Let's focus on getting through the foaling first." As Amber's due date approached, Dr. Martinez visited more frequently, monitoring the mare's condition with growing optimism. "Everything looks good," she assured them after checking Amber's vital signs. "The foal is in the correct position, and Amber's health is strong. I'd estimate we're looking at another 2 to 3 weeks." Preparations for the birth intensified. Thomas reinforced Amber's stall, adding extra bedding and installing a small camera system that would allow them to monitor her from the house. Victoria arranged for a professional foaling attendant to be on call, and Lily read every book she could find on equine birth and neonatal care. Despite their different backgrounds and initial wariness, Thomas noticed that he, Lily, and Victoria had formed an unlikely team, united by their concern for Amber and her unborn foal. There was still uncertainty about what would happen after the birth, but for now, they were working together toward a common goal. One evening, as Thomas checked on the horses before bed, he found Victoria still at the barn, sitting quietly outside Amber's stall. It was unusual for her to stay so late. "Everything okay?" he asked, concerned. Victoria nodded, her eyes on the mare who was peacefully munching hay. just thinking about how differently this could have turned out. If you and Lily hadn't found her at that auction, Thomas leaned against the stall door. We got lucky. Or maybe Amber did. Maybe we all did, Victoria replied softly, and in the dim light of the barn, Thomas thought he saw the glimmer of tears in her eyes. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a moonless June night. Thomas fumbled for his phone in the darkness, his mind foggy with sleep until he registered the urgency in Victoria's voice. The camera shows she's in labor. I'm on my way. Fully awake now, Thomas threw on clothes and hurried to Lily's room. His daughter was already sitting up in bed as if some sixth sense had alerted her. Amber? She asked simply. Thomas nodded. Get dressed. It's time. By the time they reached the barn, Victoria's SUV was already in the driveway, and the lights inside the structure blazed against the night. Dr. Martinez had been notified and was en route, and the foaling attendant, a calm, experienced woman named Margaret, was already inside, assessing Amber's condition. The mare was pacing her stall restlessly, her sides heaving, stopping occasionally to paw at the bedding or look back at her flanks with anxious eyes. The birth sac was visible, a telltale sign that delivery was imminent. Good timing, Margaret remarked, her voice steady and reassuring. First stage is nearly complete. Transition to active labor should begin soon. Victoria stood at the stall door, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained nervous energy. She was dressed in what must have been the first clothes she'd grabbed, sweatpants and a wrinkled button-down shirt, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. It was the most disheveled Thomas had ever seen her. Should we be doing something? Lily whispered, her eyes wide as she watched Amber circle the stall. Not yet, Margaret replied. This part is natural. She needs to position the foal correctly. We only intervene if there's a problem. For the next hour, they watched as Amber's contractions intensified. The mare would stop, her body tensing, then resume her restless pacing. Finally, she lay down in the straw, her legs stretched out before her, her breathing labored. This is it, Margaret said, moving calmly into the stall. Active labor. Victoria, Thomas, I may need your help. Lily, stay back for now, but be ready to assist if I call you. Lily nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the moment. Dr. Martinez arrived just as Amber's contractions reached their peak, the mare grunting with the effort of pushing. Water broke 15 minutes ago, Margaret reported. We should see the foal soon. As if on cue, the amniotic sac appeared, containing 2 tiny hooves. The entire team held their breath, watching for the critical next stage, the appearance of the foal's nose, which would indicate proper positioning. There, Dr. Martinez murmured as a small muzzle became visible between the legs. Good presentation. But as minutes passed, it became apparent that something wasn't right. Despite Amber's efforts, the foal wasn't progressing beyond this point. The mare was tiring visibly, her sides heaving with exertion, sweat darkening her coat. She's exhausted, Victoria said, worry creasing her brow. And the foal isn't moving. Dr. Martinez moved quickly to examine the situation more closely. The shoulders are stuck. We need to help her now, or we risk losing both of them. What followed was a tense ballet of coordinated efforts. Thomas and Victoria held Amber steady while Dr. Martinez and Margaret worked to adjust the foal's position. Lily stood frozen at the stall door, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white, whispering encouragement that only Amber could hear. On the next contraction, pull gently with me, Dr. Martinez instructed, her hands positioned on the foal's legs. Steady, even pressure, ready now. With a synchronized effort, they assisted as Amber gave one final massive push. There was a moment of resistance, then suddenly the foal slid free in a rush of fluid and movement. For a heart-stopping second, everything was still. Then Dr. Martinez moved swiftly, clearing the newborn's airways and rubbing its chest vigorously. Come on, little one, she urged, breathe. The foal gave a weak shudder, then a stronger one, and finally took its first gasping breath. A collective sigh of relief filled the barn as the tiny creature began to move, its spindly legs twitching with new life. "It's a filly," Margaret announced, gently clearing more fluid from the foal's nostrils. "And she's a fighter." Amber, exhausted but alert, raised her head to look at her offspring. The maternal instinct was immediate and powerful. She nickered softly, a sound filled with such tenderness that it brought tears to Lily's eyes. "She's beautiful," the girl whispered, watching as the wobbly foal began to show signs of trying to rise. The newborn was predominantly chestnut like her mother, but with a startling white blaze that ran from between her eyes all the way down her muzzle, and 4 white socks that stood out against her reddish coat. Victoria moved closer to Thomas and Lily, her professional reserve completely abandoned. "Look at those markings," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like her great-grandmother. It's like history repeating itself." For the next hour, they watched the ancient, miraculous sequence unfold. The foal's determined efforts to stand, falling and trying again with stubborn persistence, Amber's gentle encouragements, and finally the triumphant moment when the spindly legs supported the little body. The first nursing followed soon after, the foal instinctively searching for and finding her mother's milk. As the crisis passed and the new life established itself, Dr. Martinez performed a thorough examination of both mare and foal. Amber had come through the difficult birth remarkably well, showing no signs of complications. The filly, however, gave the vet some cause for concern. "Her breathing is a bit labored," Dr. Martinez noted, listening to the foal's chest with her stethoscope. "And her temperature is slightly elevated. It could be nothing, just the stress of a difficult birth, but we'll need to monitor her closely for the next 24 hours. Victoria's face tightened with worry. "What are you thinking? Pneumonia?" "Too early to tell," the vet replied, "but given the complications during delivery, there's a risk of aspiration. I'll start her on preventative antibiotics and we'll keep a close watch." As dawn broke over the farm, casting golden light through the barn windows, Dr. Martinez and Margaret finally left, promising to return in a few hours. Thomas made coffee for the remaining vigil keepers, and they settled on bales of hay outside the stall, unwilling to leave the new mother and her vulnerable foal. Lily sat cross-legged on the barn floor, her sketchbook open on her lap, capturing the scene before her. Amber standing protectively over her sleeping foal, the first light of morning illuminating them both. The intensity of the night had left the girl quiet and thoughtful, her usual chatter replaced by a contemplative silence. "She needs a name," Victoria said finally, cradling her coffee mug between her hands. "The filly." Lily looked up from her drawing, surprised by the invitation implicit in Victoria's words. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "What about Hope? Because that's what she represents. Everything Amber and all of us hoped for." Victoria considered for a moment, then nodded. "Hope," she repeated softly. "Yes, I think that fits perfectly." Thomas watched the exchange with interest, noting the change in Victoria's demeanor. The businesslike horse owner who had first arrived at their farm had been replaced by someone more vulnerable, more human. The birth had affected her deeply. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she looked at Amber and the new foal with a mixture of wonder and regret. "She's going to be okay, isn't she?" Lily asked, voicing the concern they all shared about the filly's labored breathing. "We'll do everything possible to make sure she is," Thomas assured her, though his eyes met Victoria's over his daughter's head, sharing an adult's understanding of the fragility of new life. Victoria reached out and squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. "Hope is strong, just like her mother. And she has all of us looking out for her now." As they watched, the filly stirred, her tiny legs twitching in sleep. Amber immediately lowered her head, nuzzling her foal with infinite tenderness, as if promising protection against whatever challenges might lie ahead. The next 48 hours tested them all. Hope's breathing difficulties worsened by that afternoon, developing into a concerning wheeze that had Dr. Martinez returning twice more before nightfall. The diagnosis was indeed aspiration pneumonia. The filly had inhaled fluid during her difficult entry into the world, and now infection threatened her fragile new life. "We're starting her on stronger antibiotics," Dr. Martinez explained, administering an injection while Thomas and Victoria held the wobbly foal steady. "And she'll need nebulizer treatments every 4 hours. I won't lie to you, this is serious. The next few days will be critical." Lily, who had been stroking Hope's neck throughout the examination, looked up with tear-filled eyes. "But she has a chance, right?" Dr. Martinez's expression softened. "Yes, Lily, she has a chance, especially with this level of care." A schedule was quickly established. The treatments needed to be administered around the clock, which meant taking shifts. Without discussion, Victoria simply moved into the Morgans' guest room, bringing an overnight bag and her laptop so she could work remotely. The temporary arrangement had a strange intimacy to it, sharing meals at the kitchen table, passing each other in the hallway in the middle of the night, all of them bleary-eyed but determined. During her shifts, Lily would read aloud to both Amber and Hope, continuing the tradition she had started months earlier. She'd moved from Black Beauty to the Black Stallion, her voice steady even when her heart wasn't. Between treatments, she sketched the pair constantly, Amber standing guard over her foal, Hope's first wobbling steps, the tender moments of nursing and bonding that continued despite the filly's illness. Victoria, during her own vigils, often found herself talking to the horses in a way she hadn't done in years. Professional distance had become second nature to her. Horses were valuable assets to be maintained, trained, and occasionally sold, but sitting on a hay bale at 3 a.m, watching Amber's protective mothering of her struggling foal, those barriers began to crumble. "I'm sorry," she whispered one night when she thought no one else was around. "I should have protected you better. None of this should have happened to you." From the shadows of the barn doorway, Thomas heard her words but remained silent, recognizing the private nature of her confession. He'd been coming to check if she needed anything, but instead retreated quietly, leaving Victoria to her moment of reckoning. By the 4th day, Hope's condition reached a crisis point. Her temperature spiked dangerously high, and her breathing became so labored that each breath seemed to take all her strength. Dr. Martinez was called again, this time arriving with additional equipment and a grave expression. "We need to be more aggressive," she said, setting up an IV drip. "She's fighting hard, but the infection is getting ahead of us." For the next 12 hours, they worked in shifts, monitoring the IV, administering treatments, and doing everything possible to keep the filly comfortable. Amber remained a constant presence, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. She rarely left Hope's side, even to eat, forcing Thomas to bring her hay and water directly to the stall. It was during this critical period that Victoria made a surprising confession to Thomas as they took a brief break outside the barn. "I was going to sell her, you know," she said, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. "Amber, before she was stolen. I had a buyer lined up, a breeding farm in Kentucky. The papers were being drawn up when she disappeared." Thomas looked at her, trying to read the expression on her face. "Why are you telling me this now?" Victoria shook her head as if puzzled by her own admission. "I'm not sure. Maybe because watching her with Hope, seeing how she fights for her foal, it makes me wonder if I ever really knew her at all, if I understood what she was capable of." "Horses often surprise us," Thomas said carefully, "if we're willing to see them as more than just animals." Victoria nodded slowly. "My father always said sentiment had no place in the horse business. That's how I was raised, to see them as investments, not as..." She trailed off. Not his family, Thomas finished for her. Yes, she said softly. Not his family. Inside the barn, Lily sat beside Hope, gently sponging the filly's overheated body with cool water as Amber watched anxiously. You have to fight, the girl whispered. Your mom did, and now it's your turn. We're all here for you. Whether it was the aggressive treatment, the constant care, or simply the foal's own will to live, that night marked the turning point. By morning, Hope's fever had broken, and her breathing, while still labored, had improved enough that Dr. Martinez allowed herself a cautious smile. She's responding to the antibiotics, she confirmed. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is a very good sign. The relief in the barn was palpable. Thomas squeezed Lily's shoulders as tears of joy streamed down her face. Even Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she stroked Hope's small muzzle. Good girl, she murmured. Brave girl. Over the next week, Hope's improvement continued steadily. Her breathing eased, her appetite increased, and her playful spirit began to emerge. She would prance around Amber on her spindly legs, occasionally breaking into awkward little bucks that made Lily laugh out loud. The nebulizer treatments continued but were gradually reduced as the filly's lungs cleared. Victoria, though technically no longer needed for round-the-clock monitoring, continued to spend most of her time at the Morgan farm. She had calls to make and business to attend to, but increasingly found herself lingering in the barn, watching the foal's antics or discussing training approaches with Thomas. The emergency had forged an unexpected camaraderie between them, a mutual respect that might, under different circumstances, have evolved into friendship. One evening, as Thomas was finishing the barn chores, he found Victoria sitting on the fence of the small paddock, where Amber and Hope were enjoying the last of the day's sunshine. The foal was racing in joyous circles around her mother, her white legs flashing, her recovery now complete. She's going to be something special, Victoria said, as Thomas joined her. Look at that movement. So natural, so balanced, and that temperament, curious about everything but not flighty. Thomas nodded in agreement. She's got the best of Amber in her, and whatever that quarter horse contributed wasn't too shabby either. They watched in companionable silence as Hope attempted a sliding stop that ended with her tumbling comically into a patch of clover. Amber nickered softly, checking that her foal was unharmed before resuming her grazing. Thomas, Victoria said finally, her voice carefully neutral. The agreement we made about what happens after Hope is weaned. Thomas tensed, his hands tightening on the fence rail. They had all been so focused on the foal's survival that the looming separation had receded into the background. But of course it was still there, an unavoidable reality that would eventually have to be faced. I know, he said, his tone equally measured. 3 more months, give or take. Victoria nodded, her eyes still on the horses. Lily's grown very attached to them both. Yes, Thomas agreed simply, not trusting himself to say more. The thought of his daughter's heartbreak when Amber and possibly Hope left was something he'd been trying not to dwell on. The thing is, Victoria continued, hesitating uncharacteristically, I've been thinking about alternatives, options that might work for everyone involved. Thomas turned to look at her directly, trying not to let hope rise too quickly. What kind of options? Victoria met his gaze, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think we might be able to find a solution that doesn't end with Amber leaving this farm. Victoria's cryptic comment about finding a solution lingered in Thomas's mind for days. He avoided mentioning it to Lily, not wanting to raise hopes that might be crushed later. But he caught himself watching Victoria during her visits, trying to decipher what she might be planning. The woman remained frustratingly circumspect, focusing conversations on Hope's development and Amber's continuing recovery rather than future arrangements. It wasn't until a sun-drenched morning in early July, with Hope now a month old and growing stronger by the day, that Victoria finally revealed what she'd been considering. She arrived earlier than usual, carrying a thick folder of documents along with her customary bag of treats for the horses. "Do you have time to talk?" she asked Thomas, nodding toward the house. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you, and Lily too, if she's available." Thomas raised an eyebrow but nodded, calling for Lily, who was brushing Amber in the paddock. The three settled around the kitchen table, Victoria looking uncharacteristically nervous as she laid out several documents. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about Amber and Hope," she began, her fingers tapping lightly on the folder, "and about what would be best for all involved, the horses included." Lily sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Victoria's face, barely breathing. "My facility in Lexington is primarily focused on competition horses," Victoria continued. "It's a high-pressure environment, training schedules, show circuits, constant evaluation. After everything Amber's been through, I'm not sure that's the right place for her anymore." She paused, looking directly at Lily. "I think she belongs here, with people who see her as more than just a valuable broodmare." Lily's eyes widened, hope blooming on her face. "You mean?" "I'm proposing a formal boarding arrangement," Victoria said, shifting into a more businesslike tone as she slid a document across the table. "Amber and Hope would remain legally mine, but they would live here permanently. I would cover all expenses, feed, veterinary care, farrier services, plus pay a monthly boarding fee that would help support your operation." Thomas picked up the document, scanning the terms with growing surprise. The proposed boarding fee was generous, far more than standard rates, enough to make a significant difference to their always tight finances. "In exchange," Victoria continued, "I'd have access to visit whenever I want, and input on major decisions regarding their care and training. Hope in particular has the potential to be a remarkable sport horse. I'd like to be involved in her development." Thomas set down the paper, studying Victoria's face. "Why? I mean, don't get me wrong, this is incredibly generous, but why not just take them back to your facility as planned? You've invested a lot in finding Amber again." Victoria's carefully composed expression faltered slightly. "Because they're happy here," she said simply. "I've watched Amber transform from the broken creature at that auction into the confident mare she is now. That didn't happen because of expensive supplements or premium hay. It happened because of the care you and Lily have provided." She looked down at her hands. "I've spent my entire career treating horses as investments. It's taken this experience to make me question whether that's always the right approach." There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by Lily's barely suppressed squeal of excitement. The girl practically vibrated in her chair, looking between the adults with pleading eyes. "I'd need to look over the terms carefully," Thomas said, trying to maintain some pragmatism, despite his daughter's obvious joy. "Make sure it's something we can commit to long-term." "Of course," Victoria agreed. "Take all the time you need. The offer won't expire." What followed was a flurry of discussions, negotiations, and planning. Thomas consulted with Dr. Martinez about the long-term implications, ensuring that their facilities were truly adequate for permanently housing the horses. Victoria worked with her lawyer to draft an agreement that protected everyone's interests while allowing for flexibility as circumstances changed. And Lily, overjoyed beyond words, devoted herself to making sure Amber and Hope knew they were home to stay. By August, with Hope nearly 2 months old and thriving, the agreement was finalized. To celebrate, Victoria suggested they all attend the Riverdale Summer Horse Show. Not to compete, but to enjoy a day out together. It would be Hope's first excursion beyond the farm, an opportunity to expose her to new sights and sounds in a controlled environment. The day of the show dawned clear and warm. They loaded Amber and Hope into Victoria's spacious trailer, the filly initially reluctant but calming once she was beside her mother. Lily rode with Victoria, chattering excitedly about which classes they would watch and which trainers might be competing. At the showgrounds, they secured a quiet spot to unload, away from the busiest areas. Hope stepped cautiously from the trailer, her eyes wide at the unfamiliar surroundings, her tail raised in excitement or alarm, perhaps both. Amber remained calm, her presence reassuring the filly as they settled into a temporary stall. The show was in full swing, with riders in crisp show attire guiding gleaming horses through their paces in multiple rings. Victoria led them through the grounds with the confidence of someone well-versed in this world, greeting acquaintances and explaining various events to Lily, whose enthusiasm was boundless. They stopped to watch a dressage competition, Victoria pointing out particularly good movements and explaining the scoring system. "That's what Amber was trained for before racing," she reminded Lily, "and Hope could have the talent for it too with her natural balance." "Could I learn to ride her that way?" Lily asked, her eyes following a rider executing a perfect half-pass. "It takes years of training for both horse and rider," Victoria cautioned. "But yes, with dedication and the right instruction, it's possible." As they continued their tour of the show, they encountered a familiar face, Maxwell Jenkins, Amber's former owner, who was speaking with a group of men near the warm-up ring. He spotted them first, his expression darkening as he recognized Thomas and Lily. His gaze moved to Victoria, whom he clearly didn't know, then fixed on Amber and the filly beside her. "Well, look who it is," he said, approaching with a forced smile. "The rescue squad. And I see the mare survived after all." His eyes assessed Hope with calculated interest. "Nice-looking foal. Quarter horse cross." "Yes," Thomas replied tersely, positioning himself slightly in front of Lily, who had instinctively moved closer to Amber. "Might be worth something after all," Jenkins continued, his tone casual but his eyes shrewd. "Interested in selling once she's weaned? I could make you a fair offer." Before Thomas could respond, Victoria stepped forward, extending her hand with a coolness that could have frosted glass. "Victoria Harrington, Briarwood Equestrian. I don't believe we've met, though I understand you temporarily had possession of my mare." Jenkins blinked, clearly thrown by her professional demeanor and the implication of her words. "Your mare?" "Yes," Victoria continued smoothly. "Amber Dawn is registered to me. She was stolen from my property last year, then apparently passed through several hands before ending up with you." She smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "I've been meaning to ask how you acquired her, actually. The police were quite interested in tracking the chain of ownership." The color drained from Jenkins's face. "I bought her fair and square at the Fairfield auction. Didn't know nothing about her being stolen." "I see," Victoria replied, her tone making it clear she didn't entirely believe him. "Well, regardless, she's back where she belongs now, and no, the foal is not for sale, at any price." Jenkins muttered something about having other business to attend to and quickly retreated, throwing one last covetous glance at Hope before disappearing into the crowd. "That was amazing," Lily breathed, looking at Victoria with newfound admiration. "You scared him off." Victoria's stern expression melted into a genuine smile. People like that only understand one language, the threat of consequences. She placed a gentle hand on Hope's neck, the filly having remained remarkably calm throughout the confrontation. "Besides, no one threatens this little one's future. Not on my watch." As they continued their day at the show, something had shifted subtly in their dynamic. The last vestiges of formality between Victoria and the Morgans had dissolved, replaced by the easy familiarity of people united by a common purpose and a shared love for two very special horses. The seasons turned, summer yielding to fall, winter, and then spring again. Hope's first birthday was celebrated with homemade horse treats, a special new halter from Victoria, and Lily's beaming pride as she led the filly through a series of simple commands they'd been practicing. No longer the wobbly newborn fighting for each breath, Hope had blossomed into a strong, intelligent yearling with her mother's athletic build and expressive eyes. Amber, too, had continued to flourish. Nearly 18 months after her rescue from the auction, she bore little resemblance to the defeated mare they'd first encountered. Her coat gleamed with health, her once prominent ribs now covered with proper muscle, her eyes bright with the confidence of a horse who knew she was valued and secure. The Morgan farm itself had undergone a transformation, with Victoria's boarding fees providing unexpected financial stability. Thomas had been able to make long-delayed improvements, reinforcing fences, repairing the barn roof, and even adding a small covered riding arena that allowed for training during inclement weather. More significantly, they had begun to take in other rescue horses for rehabilitation, with Lily developing a remarkable talent for working with the most traumatized animals. Victoria's role had evolved as well. What had begun as occasional visits to check on her horses had gradually expanded into regular involvement in the daily life of the farm. She had introduced Thomas to several of her wealthy clients who were looking for safe, reliable homes for retired show horses. She had arranged for Lily to receive professional dressage lessons, nurturing the girl's natural affinity for the discipline. And somewhere along the way, the businesswoman's sharp edges had softened, her professional reserve giving way to genuine warmth. On a golden afternoon in early June, with Hope approaching 14 months old, Victoria arrived at the farm carrying not just her usual bag, but also a large envelope and a bottle of champagne. Thomas, who was adjusting the sprinkler system in the paddock, raised his eyebrows at the unusual additions. "Special occasion?" he asked as she approached. Victoria smiled, a hint of nervousness in her expression. "Potentially. Is Lily around? I have something I'd like to discuss with both of you." Lily was found in the barn, practicing braiding techniques on Amber's mane, skills Victoria had been teaching her for future show presentations. At the summons, she gave Amber a quick pat and hurried to join them at the picnic table under the old oak tree that shaded the yard. Victoria set the envelope on the table, her hands resting lightly on it as she gathered her thoughts. "I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately about what's truly important," she began. "About legacy, purpose, and the kind of impact I want to have." Thomas and Lily exchanged curious glances but remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "My family has been in the horse business for 3 generations," Victoria continued. "My grandfather started with 2 mares and built an empire. My father expanded it into racing and breeding, and I've focused on competition and prestige." She paused, looking out toward the paddock where Hope was dozing in the afternoon sun. "But lately I've been asking myself what it's all for. What remains when the ribbons fade and the trophies gather dust?" She opened the envelope and removed several legal documents. "I've decided to establish a foundation, the Amber Dawn Rescue and Rehabilitation Foundation. Its mission will be to save horses from situations like the one Amber was in, rehabilitate them with proper care, and place them in homes where they'll be valued for more than just their utility." Thomas's eyes widened as he began to understand the scope of what Victoria was proposing. "That's incredible. But why are you telling us this?" Victoria smiled, pushing the documents toward them. "Because I want this farm to be the foundation's headquarters. The work you've already begun with rescue horses shows you have the heart and the skill for it. With proper funding and expansion, you could help so many more." Lily gasped, her eyes growing round. "You mean we'd save horses like Amber? All the time?" "Exactly. Victoria confirmed. The foundation would purchase this property at well above market value, she added with a nod to Thomas, and then lease it back to you for $1 a year. You'd be the directors with full autonomy to run the operation as you see fit. I'd serve as chairman of the board and primary donor, but the day-to-day decisions would be yours. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. Victoria, I don't even know what to say. It's beyond generous. It's selfish, actually, she replied with unexpected candor. This place, these horses, you and Lily, you've all reminded me why I fell in love with horses in the first place, not for what they could win or what they were worth, but for who they are. She looked toward the barn, where Amber had wandered to the door and was watching them curiously. I want to be part of something meaningful, something that honors what Amber has taught us all. The discussion continued well into the evening, moving from the practicalities of the foundation structure to dreams of how many horses they might save. By the time the champagne was opened, with apple juice for Lily, the basic framework had been established. The Morgan farm would become Amber Dawn Rescue, with capacity for up to 20 horses in various stages of rehabilitation. Thomas would oversee operations, Lily would assist with training when not in school, and Victoria would handle fundraising and public relations. To new beginnings, Victoria proposed, raising her glass in a toast. And to Amber, Lily added, for bringing us all together. As darkness fell, they walked to the barn for a final check on the horses. Amber and Hope shared a large stall now, the filly still finding comfort in her mother's presence, even as she grew more independent each day. They stood together at the stall door, watching the peaceful scene. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? Lily asked softly. If we hadn't gone to the auction that day, or if we'd arrived later, or if Dad had said no when I begged to save her. Thomas placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Life is full of those moments, Lily. Small choices that end up changing everything. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. In my family's business, we'd call it an investment that paid unexpected dividends. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's about seeing value where others don't. As if understanding she was the subject of their conversation, Amber approached the stall door, her eyes serene as she gently nudged Lily's hand. Hope followed, her youthful curiosity evident in every movement. The contrast between them was striking. The mature mare with her quiet dignity and the spirited young filly with her whole life ahead of her. 2 years ago, Thomas said, Amber was standing alone in an auction pen, ignored by everyone until a certain 11-year-old girl refused to walk away. And now look, Victoria added, she's the inspiration for a foundation that could help hundreds of horses. Lily beamed, her heart full as she stroked Amber's soft muzzle. I knew she was special from the first moment I saw her, I just didn't know how special. As they turned to leave, giving the horses peace for the night, Lily paused for one last look. In the dim light of the barn, she could still picture Amber as she had been that first day. Thin, defeated, alone. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was as if the mare's very spirit had been reborn. And in that moment, Lily understood something profound about healing, that sometimes, in saving another, we find pieces of ourselves we never knew were missing. Amber had needed them, yes, but somehow they had needed Amber just as much. With that thought warming her heart, she whispered a final goodnight to the horses who had changed everything, then turned toward home where new dreams were waiting to unfold.